Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and for this video, I'm just having a bit of fun. Games Workshop sent us through for review the new Deathrattle launch box, and I thought, whilst Andy had taken the White Lord to paint up for over on Patreon, I thought I'd have a go with the new Barrowguard, or Graveguard as I keep accidentally calling them, and I imagine a lot of people are going to keep accidentally calling them for a fair old while. I love Warhammer Fantasy, and the first time round in the hobby for me, one of my favourite things was a series of supplements for Fantasy at the time, and one of these was called Circle of Blood, and it has one of my favourite pieces of artwork and by one of my favourite artists, Mark Gibbons, on the front. So I thought, let's use that as a piece of inspiration. And also the Vampire Counts book that came out in that edition, we started to see a change in Games Workshop's approach to basing the miniatures. So we still had the green rims, but now we had things like static grass, we had earth tones and stuff on the top. So it just started to all get a little bit more grim, a little bit more gritty, just a little bit more, I guess, interesting in some respects. So those were my inspirations for this. The project's for nothing else than to sit on the shelf and make me smile. So it's old school all the way, with a handful of products and techniques that I enjoy using nowadays thrown in. So I hope you enjoy. Let's paint. Let's start off with the cloth. Now, obviously, miniatures of this era, red was a very prevalent colour in just about every aspect of a miniature. And for these, I chose to use red on the cloth. And I really like Mephiston Red. I feel like it's a proper classic, almost boring red, but it was absolutely perfect for what I wanted to try, the vibe I kind of wanted to try and get across. Now, there was no intentions of trying to get any sort of realism into these models. I didn't really need them to make sense or anything like that. I just wanted them to give off the right vibe. So I decided to airbrush the Mephiston Red straight over the black undercoat. And this is thinned about 2 drops of normal airbrush thinner. I'm spraying about 20 to 25 psi, and I'm using a 0.4mm needle and nozzle, and this is in one of our Harder and Steenbeck signature series Infinities. And you'll see that I'm building up these fairly thin layers of paint, getting more and more opaque towards the bottom of the cloth, just so it has this sort of quite a dramatic fade of black into red at the bottom. And that's it. I think it looks cool. It's quite simple. I did a ton of testers, and this is the order in which I found it worked sort of best for me. Then onto the bone, and with this project, there was a few things I really wanted to avoid. I didn't want to do much rust. I didn't want to do much verdigris, and I wanted to do a new bone recipe, and that's simply because I'm really proud of our existing videos on those subjects. So I will link those up in the top, and if you want to paint your skeletons like that, I think you'll have a good time if you follow them. But for this guy, I was like, okay, so what type of bone haven't I done before? And I thought, well, I haven't done a very grey sort of bone colour. So in the end, I picked Petroleum Grey by scale 75, which is quite a purple grey, but it's just a really nice, I really like this colour. And I thought there's going to be a bit of green on the model as well, so purple will probably be quite pleasant. And then I chose to mix in light warm grey, I think it's called by Acryl, sort of quite a blue grey. I think they call it warm grey, but I don't know, like I didn't think blue could be warm, and I feel like it's got blue in it, but maybe I'm wrong. The point was I thought it was a nice colour, and I mixed it in, and I thought that looks nice as well. So let's use that. So it's roughly, I don't know, a 50-50 mix for the highlight, and then I added in a little bit more for the sort of final highlight with it. But again, just sort of taking my time with it, but also like, you know, this is a regiment. This is ostensibly a 20-man regiment, although I've used a base to, or 15-man regiment, but I've used a base to bulk it out a little bit. But I didn't want anything to take too long. You know, the point was to view the unit as a whole. And lastly, I thought I'd use some enamels because I haven't for a while. So enamel washes are these pre-made washes. You might see them called panel liners, or you might see them with names like this, like Winter Streak and Grime. But it's just in this case, it's a green-brown. And you can treat these exactly like you do oil washes. For all intents and purposes, for our miniatures painting, an enamel product and an oil paint are exactly the same thing for the vast majority of the use cases that we have for them. So you can treat them the same. So I can thin them down and clean them with just mineral spirits. They will. One of the nice things about enamel washes is they do dry quicker than your oil washes. So once they were on, I left them to sit on the model for, I don't know, 10 minutes, something like that, 10, 15 minutes, enough time to have a cup of tea, and then quick blast with a hairdryer and you're good to go. The other nice thing, of course, is that they are effectively ready-made. You can still dilute them a little bit, but you don't need to, and therefore you can get quite thin washes with these, whereas you may have noticed if you try to make up any oil washes, it gets to a point where the oil basically splits out. So these are certainly a nice alternative. They give a slightly different finish, and just another great one to have in the toolbox. The biggest downside, in my opinion, to enamel washes, and I've used these for over a decade, in fact some of these are over a decade old, is they absolutely stink. So please make sure you're using, good ventilation, the correct sort of safety equipment, all the rest of it, if you are going to pick them up and use them. And once it was dry, just went back in and did a tiny re-highlight on the bone. Again, takes less than a minute a model. Now for the eyes, I thought, do you know what, let's just do a bit of sort of gimmicky, cheesy OSL. I didn't want to go overboard on it because I didn't want it to take ages. But also, it's a bit of fun. It's reminiscent of that cover art, and I thought, why not? Let's do it on the eyes. And for this, I'm using, to begin with, white ink. So the reason I'm using white ink here is it's very, very opaque. So it's very, very sort of solid color, but it's also very, very fluid. So you can almost, it behaves like you would if you've used a wash. It runs off your brush very, very easily, but it stays really, really opaque and solid when you apply it, which means that anything we put over the top of that is going to be nice and bright because we're using the white ink. So that's why I've chosen to use white ink. In this case, you could use something like a white oil paint if you wanted, or you could just dilute white acrylic paint. But for me, like, white ink is my favorite thing to use for this application. And then I chose to use a green ink to give the glow. You could have used something like Tesseract Glow or another green contrast paint or something. But I had my ink box out and I saw my green one there and decided to use it. And for the eyes anyway, that's all I was going to do. And for the banner, initially I wanted to try and find like an old school skull decal. I couldn't find one on all my sheets. And then I thought, well, what else is a nice kind of Warhammery thing in my head? And it's checkers. I love that checker pattern. John Blanche uses it on loads of his artwork. And if you see Blanchetsu's stuff, you'll often see it repeating. But I certainly wasn't going to sit there for this project and freehand a load of checkers. Because quite frankly, the project doesn't deserve it. To say it's a bit of fun. It did end up being a little bit of a test bed for a few different recipes and techniques that I'd like to use in the future when I've refined them a little, which perhaps that's something we'll talk about at the end. But for now, keep it simple. So I just grabbed a few checker decals. Now I've got these from, I think they're called Microscale Industries. They're the same people that make the Microsol and Microset products. I will link up in the top a little short video about using those products to help you apply your decals or waterside transfers, whatever you want to call them, give you an idea of what's what. And then, so I just applied those following that tutorial. And then I thought, well, I want to try and sort of blend them in a little bit more to the black banner. So I just popped some black in my airbrush. And I just started fading them out at the top and fading them out at the bottom, just so that they had a similar kind of effect to what I had done on the robes. Again, not worrying about anything to do with realism or a lot of really light sources or anything, to be honest, just make it look cool. Now, one thing that I'd done here is I had not diluted my black paint enough for the pressure that I was spraying at. And what I ended up getting, if you can just see here, is sort of this speckly effect. It doesn't matter because I'm going to apply more paint in a second anyway. But if you see this happening, then often a cause of that is going to be that the paint is not dilute enough for the pressure you're spraying at. So I just thinned it down a little and it carried on. Now, I mentioned earlier, Andy had painted up the White Lord. So this is over on our Patreon at the moment, full video on this. A huge thank you to those of you that support us on Patreon. It means Andy and myself, and very soon Ben, will be able to do this full time and produce tutorials for you on YouTube, tutorials for you on Patreon, the podcasts and streams over on Twitch, things like the miniature show. All of that is thanks to the support that you guys give us on Patreon, which enables us to just keep on creating and keep on producing things which hopefully help you enjoy your hobby a little bit more. So massively appreciate it. And if you can't support us on there for any reason, then your likes, your subscribes, your comments on these YouTube videos make a massive difference too. I really appreciate all of those as well. I thoroughly enjoy reading through them. So do let me know about any other sort of old school inspired units or models you might like to see from fantasy, because I've kind of got the bug now after doing this. Once all that was dry, I then just went over with the Mephiston Red, slightly thinner than I had done before, and just just so it matched in with the red trousers, red cloth rather. And one thing I had noticed, because again I was being a little bit slapdash with this, I've been a bit quickly, I hadn't applied the transfers perfectly, and actually what I discovered was that they had not adhered perfectly in some of the areas where I had tattered them up. But actually I really, really like the effect, and this is something I'm going to see if I'm able to replicate deliberately on some future projects. But I feel like for undead stuff or Nurgle or things like that, I feel like that kind of flaky effect could be really, really cool if there's a way we can sort of control it. Now for the armour, I did a few different testers, which is one of the reasons why this unit's only 15, not 20, and in the end settled on a silver. I've just used Iron Warriors. It's one of my favourite sort of relatively dark silvers to use. I love the coverage of it. I love the colour of it. I love how easy it is to go and find in the shops. It's just great. I love it. And one of my favourite things about metallics is that we can use washes and glazes and things to colour them and make them a little bit more interesting. So whilst I said I didn't want to do loads of rust and all that on these guys because I love that rust video and I didn't just want to repeat it, I did make up a little mix of rattling grime and Fuegan orange, a contrast and a shade. It was roughly 1-to-1, and then so it was 1 rattling, 1 Fuegan, 1 drop of water, which made up just a nice wash to discolour the armour a little bit, just give it that little tint of sort of rusty colour in there. And you saw when I was applying it, I was trying to make sure I pulled my brush strokes towards the recesses, so that's where the majority of the wash mix would pool. Then for the gold, a nice green gold. I've used Necro Gold here. Blighted Gold by P3 is a very similar colour, and you could probably do something with, say, Liberator Gold and mix in a brown or a green wash or something to create a similar kind of effect there as well. I'm really sorry if there's some strange noises, by the way. My dog is she's not very well at the minute, so she's sort of whinging and groaning in the back. She's absolutely fine. Like she'll be fine. She's just eaten something she shouldn't have eaten. But apologies if that comes off in the video. And then a Garaghaks Sewer, a nice sort of warm brown grungy mix. And then I love using Poxwalker Shade as a kind of quick oxidization. And I know with gold it's not necessarily 100% accurate, but I just don't care. I think it looks cool. And that was essentially my only nod or compromise when it came to that sort of rust and verdigris effect. For the spear halves and the wings, kept it simple, black with a simple grey highlight. Again, Eshin Grey is a nice sort of grey to use for this. It's bright enough that it shows up and it looks like a few chips. You see, we're just doing some little sort of tippy-tappy chips along the edges here just to give it a bit of life. But also it's not like mega bright and mega shiny. So yeah, it's absolutely fine to use for this. And then for the leather, again, just keeping it simple. A recipe you'll see me often use, Thondia Brown Steel Legion Drab. I don't think I even did a middle mix of this. I think it was just base coat of Thondia, give it the Steel Legion Drab. And there was an element of that sort of edge highlighting style, albeit sort of quite scratchy. But I wanted to do it, because again, it's reminiscent of what's done at the time. This isn't meant to be a direct facsimile of those earlier heavy metal paint jobs or anything like that. It's simply inspired by and painting in the way I tend to paint, but trying to apply some of sort of those the theories and the ideas behind it. Then I gave the whole model a satin varnish, just because we had a few different finishes going on because of the products we'd used. And I chose satin because, again, I feel like classic gaming minis of that time kind of had that sort of satin kind of finish to them. So the basing was something I really wanted to have a bit more fun with, and it's something I'm determined that I'm going to address a little bit more this year with the work I've done. So this project, whilst it was just a bit of fun, this was actually quite a good test bed for me to just start trying to use a few different products, trying to take a little bit more care, put a little bit more thought into my basing, that I can then elevate going forwards for, say, fantasy projects and things like that I care a little bit more about, or I consider more display or, sort of really, really work at. I decided to use this larger base for the command just because whilst everything ranks up pretty well, I just like to give them a bit more room, particularly the banner bearer. And also it means you have to paint like 3 less miniatures, so unit fillers are always a way. But I quite like doing it with the command. I thought it was nice to almost make like a little vignette with them. And you'll see here that when I pin my models to the corks, or I'm using the eggs by Artis Opus at the moment, really like those. I drill in, I pin it, but I just use a piece of blue tack to secure the pin rather than glue, because it means it's easy to then remove them without having to grip the model really tightly and remove paint. you know, and all that sort of thing. So once I had them roughly where I wanted, glued them in. And this is the order I did the paint job in as well. I found that doing bits of the basing at this stage were useful and sort of less messy. So I'm using texture paste here. This is called Dry Ground. Now, if I had it in time and it had arrived in time, I would have used a much darker mud colour. But I didn't, and I didn't want to delay the video any further because of it. So I've used Dry Ground, and I'll have to colour it to get it where I want it. But one of the things I really like about using these various texture pastes is that they are very often also an adhesive. So whilst they're wet, we can apply things like our clumps, clump foliage or static grass, tufts, and just basing material. Now, there's a company that I really like, and Andy does as well, and we've used for a very long time, and has actually been very supportive of us, a company called Reality in Scale, it's a Dutch company. Just produce really, really fantastic little pots of sort of ground cover of various different sort of mixes. Generally, always quite sort of organic-y looking. So there's, you know, great for fantasy stuff. And yeah, so I'm using some of that for this. So this is a wasteland mix, and you can see it's got just cool little bits of twig and rock and sand and grit and all different sort of grades of it. So a few big bits here and there, and then just a really liberal sprinkling of the ground cover itself. Now, when I'd done all the other bases, I'd put the tufts on first, straight into the texture paste, so they adhered much better. I forgot with this one. I was just worrying about getting it in focus, and I did the ground cover first, so just switched the order of these things round because they didn't glue on as well. And when I came to give them a quick blast with a hairdryer, half of them flew off. So yeah, texture paste, then tufts, then the ground cover is the order I actually did the majority of the unit in. But you can see here, you know, it's not a lot of work to get just a lovely, I think, a much more interesting texture on the base than we would if we say we just use sand and PVA. And then I thought, well, I've got the enamels box out. I've been using it. You can see how old this pot is. I think it says panel liner for green and brown. It's just a dark brown colour. And I thought, right, great, let's slot this all over and this will give us a nice brown thing. But also I quite like the fact that it lets some of those tones show through anyway. Just I feel like it just gives it that little bit more natural kind of look. Now, next up, it was time to do the rims, and I was determined to do green rims because I felt like that was the correct homage of the time. And I looked through my fairly extensive green collection, and I really liked this Loren green colour. I know it is not Goblin Green. I know it is not close to Goblin Green, and the million shades of that existed, but I really like it. So this is the one I decided to use, and I've airbrushed it round just because it's way quicker to get a nice solid smooth coat using the airbrush. And then I did it at that stage so that if I did get any overspray, which you do get a tiny bit here and there, I'm able just to cover up with the paint here. So I'm not dry brushing the paint on here. It's, you know, it's on my wet palette. I've diluted it probably 2 parts paint to 1 part water. Wiped most of the paint off the brush, but this is the same amount of paint I'd have on the brush if, say, I was painting some brown on the miniature. And I'm just very, very gently rubbing it across the surface just to pick up some of the grain details. And it's the same colours I used for the leather just because I had them in front of me. So it's the Thondia and then the Steel Legion. But for me, I felt like this was a really nice nod to that basing change that happened around the time of the Undead and the Hordes of Chaos, just as I was sort of getting out the hobby. And it's just think it's super cool. And I'm really looking forward to having some more fun with bases. So yeah, watch this space. So next up, I wanted to just a little bit of weathering to the model. And I decided to use an oil called Industrial Earth because it's got quite a lot of green in it. And I thought that would go nicely with the red, but also it just has that kind of fairly unpleasant sort of undead kind of look. So I'd pop the oil on a piece of kitchen paper for a few minutes just to leach out a little bit of the excess oil, which will just help it dry a little bit quicker. And then I am diluting it down with mineral spirits. And this is just DIY shop mineral spirits. I like to use things like Sansador, which is a Winsor & Newton product, which is a low odor artist grade one when I'm doing my own hobby. But for videos, I tend to use just normal mineral spirits because they dry really quickly. They evaporate quickly, which is great for filming, but they do smell. So again, you know, look after yourselves. Now, to mix it down, I've created quite a thick wash. You can see this is thicker than the enamel washes we were using earlier. And I've roughly 50-50. If you go much more oil than paint, if you go much more mineral spirits than oil paint, that's when you'll tend to get it splitting out on you. So it's about finding that nice sort of happy medium. And for me, this was enough of a wash that it would flow into the recesses, but also it was thick enough that I could control it really easily on the model. And that was important to me because I didn't just want to slop it over the entire miniature. I wanted to put it all over the cloth because I thought the green and the red would work nicely, but we've already done a bit of work to the armour to make it look sort of lived in and a bit grotty. And if we just do this sort of green filter over the entire model, I feared it would dull it down too much and make it too, sort of homogeneous and just not as interesting. So the odd little dot of it here and there on the armour, but not on the bone, not on the eyes or anything like that. Just a little bit here and there. And then once that was dry, which again took, I don't know, lunchtime basically, I wanted to go in and just bring things back to life a little bit, ironically, I suppose. So I've gone in with the Mephiston and I've just edge highlighted really, not all the way around, but most of the edges of the cloaks. So this is absolutely fine once that oil paint's dry. It's not going to reactivate or interact with the paint at all. Same as we don't need to varnish, before we do our oils or anything like that. So a little bit of that. Then lead belcher, so a slightly brighter silver than the Iron Warriors, because again, I wanted this to sort of catch the eye a bit more. Don't need to be too subtle, particularly with regiments, say. And I'll talk a little bit about what I think I've learned from this process with regards to regiment painting. So a little bit of that on some of the silver. Again, like 30 seconds a model, maybe a minute a model. And I appreciate, 15 minis, that's 15 minutes, but, it's not a big job. Then for the gold highlight, I chose to use Victorian gold. I've got a few of these dark star metals and I really like the colours, but they're quite glittery. So for a lot of painting, I find them too much. But actually for nice little sort of edge highlights and stuff, they're really cool because they're super sparkly. And as I say, a really nice range of colours. But again, it was just a lighter green gold. And then back in to just pick the bone out. Again, just the knuckles and the face is all I did. For this one, I didn't worry about the sort of forearms or the calves or anything like that. You know what it's like when you're painting units as well. Like, don't worry about the back of miniatures. So the backs of them got an awful lot less care and attention than the fronts did. And then finally, I think it was finally anyway, I wanted to just add a little bit more of a glow to the eye. And the reason I've done this at the end is because I wanted to get a little bit of overspray on the finished armour colour. So that's why I did the messy part earlier, or I think messy part earlier with the inks where I went in with the brush and you saw me splodging it everywhere. Whereas this one, I've got Tesseract Glow in here with a drop of airbrush thinner. I've dropped my airbrush pressure right the way down. We're in sort of single digits here, under 10, probably 8 to 10-ish, something like that. Just to give me, and it's such a dilute mix, it's not going to clog or anything, but it just gives me a bit more control. And I very rarely ever do that. I nearly always 20 PSI, but for this application, I felt it was worth doing it. And it just gave me a lovely sort of cheesy little glow to the eyes. And there we go. There's the unit all done together, ranked up and looking, I think, lovely. I'm so glad I did this. I've no idea how this video will be received. I'm aware it's probably a bit too niche, but I had a ton of fun, and sometimes that's all that matters, right? And I'm on such a buzz and kick at the minute with the old world and fantasy in general. I just want to keep painting it. So please let me know down in the comments what other fantasy stuff you'd like to see. I've got a Beastman idea coming up I'd really like to do, and yeah, who knows? But yeah, loving doing it. And I said, as I've mentioned sort of throughout the video, one of the things I try to do when I'm doing these sort of, I guess, silly little projects, and that's not meant to be derogatory. They're really valuable, right? They're good for your noggin. And for me, I always try to maybe try out a technique or a product that perhaps I haven't used for a while, or use it in a different way, and just sort of note it down in my painting notebook, what I maybe learned from that and how maybe I could apply that to a paint job that I spend more time and care on, in the future. It was nice to use the enamel washes again. I haven't used those for a while. I definitely want to look at sort of utilizing OSL a little bit more, not for my fantasy, Warhammer Fantasy stuff, but some other stuff I'm looking at painting in the not too distant future. And also just getting that practice in of painting regiments. My dwarf army, it's growing, but it's taking time. I'm showing pics here because, I spent a lot more time on these dwarfs than I have on the skellies, and I think it shows, but it's interesting to see how much difference there is really given the time. But, it was things like, I say, not worrying about painting the backs of certain miniatures, but also I found as I was going through it, things from when I was a commission painter were coming back to me. So let's say when I would paint the gold details, I wouldn't pick one model up and do all of the gold details on that model, put him down and then pick the next one up. I would do just the little sort of neck piece, the cuirass or something I think it's called. I would do that on each model, then go back, then I would do the wing on each model, then I would go back. And it just meant that I find it means I don't miss things as well when you're painting in such quantity. So it was just nice to get back in the groove of that, especially when so often for YouTube I'm painting a couple of miniatures each week, often completely unrelated to each other. So yeah, just loads and loads of fun. So really hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know down in the comments if you've got any questions about anything I've done, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks ever so much for all of your support. Take care, and I'll see you next time. If you've liked any of the models in this video and you fancy having an army of them yourself, but perhaps you don't have the time or wherewithal to get it done, consider dropping us an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com, and maybe Ben can sort you out.